Hello, everyone. It's Friday, November 21st. It's just over 6 a.m. here in Montreal, and I'd like to welcome you all to this interview on high stakes decision making in risk and crisis communications. I'm your host, Tan Sukhera, CEO and co founder of Piar, a company offering workshops to global public relations and communications professionals for improved decision quality and judgment as we navigate the AI age, and whose workshops are rooted in behavioral science. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, a true leader who's built an ironclad reputation in the risk and crisis communications world, known for his honesty, unwavering commitment to putting people first, and sage wisdom to advise C-suite leaders of large and powerful organizations across the globe. I'm speaking about none other than Philippe Borremans. Philippe Borremans is recognized as one of the foremost experts in risk and crisis communications, specializing in AI-driven crisis and emergency strategies. And he's advised global organizations, including the World Health Organization and the European Council. He's authored Mastering Crisis Communication with ChatGPT and served as president of the International Public Relations Association. His 25 plus years of experience across 30 plus countries in leadership and consulting roles, including an H&K Strategies affiliate, IBM, and Porter Novelli, position him as an obvious authority in the field. I'm a longtime fan of Wag the Dog. I remember frosty Toronto winter mornings, taking the train at 7 a.m., being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed to make an impact in the PR and comms measurement space. And I'd religiously listen to Wag the Dog podcast reruns as I'd make my way downtown to the office, and I'd find myself looking out at the reflection of the window. I could see the CN Tower and downtown, the Toronto skyline sort of in the distance there, and I'd notice myself smiling at the insights from Wag the Dog. And I'm not even trying to be overly appreciative here. It's truly a resource that I'm grateful for. It actually happened in two stages distinctly because, well, I felt so much more confident after I'd done so. And for the viewers, this was back when I worked for Cision, and actually I did it again years later when I worked for Meltwater. Now, Philippe and I have obviously connected since, and I view you, Philippe, as a friend and confidant, and I hope that the audience will follow also in my footsteps, assuming that they haven't done the same already, to which, if that's the case, I ask, what are you waiting for? And with that, let's jump into some questions. Philippe, there's a terrific quote from you that crisis communications is an improv. It's a high stakes discipline where hesitation, confusion, and a poorly chosen word can cost lives, trust, and reputation. I want to ask, in that example, business leaders, and to be perfectly honest, sadly, many comms leaders make a vague assumption that crisis comms is basically improvising well in the moment when something goes awry. What are some other commonly found assumptions or misconceptions you've seen people operate on that made you go, wow, that's just plain wrong?
Tan, first, thanks for having me. And your introduction gave me a feeling of maybe I'm getting very old now because I've been in this business for some time. And then when you mention it like that, it seems like, oh my God, that's a long time. But no, thanks for the question. Well, yeah. So improvising on the spot, I hear that from time to time, and then I go like, not really. Other things is companies, professionals having a false confidence. So they feel very confident I can manage this crisis because they have a plan for a cyber attack, and they have a plan for a product recall, and they have a plan for etc., etc. I think that's very dangerous today in the way that our crisis landscape and emergency landscape has changed. Many people have heard about polycrisis and permacrisis, so ongoing crises that seem to never end, and polycrisis, those are the interconnected crises that we've seen. And I do think that has changed the dynamic. So it's dangerous to feel comfortable because the plans are there. And then on top of that, I think even if some organizations have interconnected crisis plans that keep, in mind a potential polycrisis setup or scenario, it's also thinking, well, we have the plan and we review it once a year, and that's fine. That's also a very dangerous assumption. I've seen the best organized or the best prepared organizations are those who have a flexible mindset, a flexible team, flexible plans, and who train those on a very, very regular basis. And Doesn't have to be the full-scale exercise every 6 months because that costs a lot of money. But it can be very small lunch and learn sessions. It can be e-learning. It can be very small tabletops, but on a regular basis. So those are a couple of assumptions that I see, which I think is dangerous. Yeah.
I really like what you said about being flexible. I think that's something that's really interesting. And just a fun fact, during the pandemic, public health professionals found that being unprepared led to resource-intensive, ineffective crisis response, and recognized the critical need for quick, uniform messaging. And that leads me to another question. Now, for years, published reports and research consistently find that communications leaders have expressed the deep desire to be viewed as strategic counsel to the C-suite, a strategic asset. Yet to want something for years implies that one does not have it yet. Why do you think comms leaders haven't been able to be perceived as strategic enough to their own C-suite? And how does risk and crisis comms offer an opportunity to achieve that objective?
Yeah. Yeah, it's still, I mean, I recently was speaking at a conference and this came up again, and every single time I hear this pop up and I'm on the stage, then I tend to be very direct with people in the room. I mean, so there are a couple of issues with that. First of all, we're a very conservative profession. We are most of the time late with new technology. That doesn't work well if you want to have a seat at the table. Secondly, I think it's also a bit of a historical problem where many people in the field come from what I would call the more creative side of business, you know, marketing and journalism and those kind of, and I come from a public relations school. It's maybe also our language and how we look at comms. For us, it's very obvious that communication is, you know, the beginning and end of all things. But for a business leader, so imagine, and I've worked with those people very closely, a CEO of a company where the bottom line is an everyday agenda point and cost cutting and optimization and all these things and productivity. Already those couple of words for most communicators is like, yeah, I understand what it is, but you know, let's push out press releases and you know, let's make the company look good. If we stick to those things and activities and tactics, what I call SOS tactics, sending out stuff, we will never get a seat at the board of the table because that's just tactics and it's a cost center. And as a CEO, I would say exactly the same things. Well, you know, you guys are. So it is talking the language and understanding. If you work in the private sector as a communicator, it's understanding the business in and out. It's understanding it on the level of your managing directors or department heads and understanding what pressure they are on or under, and then translating that and how can communication support this. And this is internal comms, external comms, that is even sometimes going all the way up to public affairs and what have you. So it's understanding the business, it's speaking the language. And then one other thing that I often hear, and again, very recently at a conference, senior communications people. How do we measure? That question pops up every single time, and some people are still pushing AVEs, advertising value equivalents. I mean, if you don't understand how to measure, make the link between your activities, communications, public relations activities, directly to how you support the bottom line of an organization, the private sector, then of course, again, you will not have a seat at the table. I just did making the link to crisis comms and risk communication. I just had a good discussion with someone who at a conference asked, but my manager doesn't understand the importance of crisis communication preparedness. I said, well, what did you do up till now? When I spoke about what it is and how it works, I said, yeah, but did you make the business case? Did you actually calculate how good crisis communication preparedness would save the organization, would prepare the organization better, would have an impact on insurance premiums that they pay, on their stakeholder? That's what we need to do. We have to make the business case for things, and there is you know, you can actually do that. my next white paper, I'll explain that because I saw there was a need for that. So I'll try to explain to communicators how they can make the business case for good crisis communication preparedness. And there's a lot of things, but if we don't do these couple of things, speak the language, understand the business, and then making the link between what we do with the business environment in a measurable way, and it can be measured. I mean, smarter people than both of us have worked on that. There's, AMEC, there is the Barcelona principles, there's research on that topic. It's not easy, it's not difficult to find it. Then, we will never have that seat at the table. Yeah.
I love what you're saying here about making the business case, and I look forward to seeing the white paper come out. I think that's very timely right now, especially with the intersection of technology that we're seeing ourselves at as public relations communications leaders. There's a key fact that almost half of C-suite respondents to a survey do not consider communications functions to be wholly aligned with leadership priorities, and I think it's a symptom of the reasons that you so nicely laid out for us here. And that ties in well with my next question, which is that Gen AI is all around us and is increasingly doing more to help communicators execute on their crisis responses or strategies or campaign planning. But if everyone has the same tools and supposedly best practices at their fingertips, what's an example of something unsaid or that people often miss despite having access to Gen AI and crisis comms frameworks?
Well, I mean, everybody has access to the same tools, but not everybody knows how to use them at the same level. So that's what other research has shown, is that a lot of public relations and communications colleagues, yes, we all have, at least those of us who have regular internet access. Let's not forget that parts of the world, it's not so easy, that we all have access to the same tools. But we've seen through research that there is also a huge lack of professional training in using those tools. A lot of people are still what I call playing around with AI. And sure, AI will be able to summarize a report and will be able to probably rewrite your press release. But if, again, that is tactical stuff and it's about mainly content creation, sending out stuff, if we stick to that, again, we follow the same problem that I just spoke about. AI can actually help us in making that measurement and evaluation link between the business and what we do. Not a lot of PR people are using it that way. AI can actually help us create very bespoke, clearly defined crisis simulations. Again, not a lot of communication professionals are using it that way. And then on a more strategic level, we now have the tools that we can actually help our C-suite look further, meaning we can easily now, because if we look at our profession, what are we doing? Yes, we have a content creation and dissemination part of the thing that's also part of comms, and let's not forget that. Fine. But we're also, I think, the best skilled at, and I think it's an intrinsic responsibility of our role, we are actually the fingers on the pulse of society. If you're in comms today and you don't know what's going on in the globe on social, political, and geopolitical levels, then you're not doing your job. Integrating that with AI, well, we can actually tell our C-suites this based on predictive analytics, thanks to AI again. These are potential things coming. How would we prepare if tomorrow, one or the other world leader decides to tax everyone? How would that impact us? And, those are strategic thinking levels, and we can do that now with AI faster, better in most cases, but we have to understand how to do that as communication professionals. And again, the latest surveys that I've seen is that there is a huge lack of professional training, and that most of us are still stuck in the content creation part. Again, very tactical, not strategic. Then in crisis and in risk, again, I mean, it has such a potential impact. The positive use of AI, and of course there's the negative use, but that's all technology, can be used negatively or positively. But on the positive side, we can actually integrate AI into our workflows, looking at from the beginning, again, predictive analytics, monitoring, seeing things coming. How do you prepare? Optimizing all the way up to our capacity building. Again, coming back to, are people actually trained to do that? Because you do need training. It's not opening up, whatever Gen AI and asking the question. That's not how it works.
Absolutely. And I personally, I've been a fan. I was reaching over in all these different reasoning techniques, and not to plug a book here, but a counterfactual reasoning. This is really an interesting read by Noel Hendrickson, PhD, and it's about this topic that you brought up about, like, if this happens, then this would happen. And I think that it's the backbone of every strategy. And as you said earlier about, like, now we have an opportunity for the C-suite to look forward, look beyond, right? And so there's definitely a causal chain that happens there, right? And there's a lot of pitfalls to your point earlier about having tools available, but not the expertise to use the tools correctly or apply those frameworks correctly. And I really do personally sit at that intersection quite often. And I think this is really critical. What you're talking about here is being able to look forward, because we're in this uncertainty kind of, we're in a realm of volatility, right? And so, yeah, huge points that you're making here.
Yeah, and it's also, what you said, and mentioning that book, for instance. One of the things I do in workshops is, and this is just me, I'm not a scientist. It's not like, I'm not definitely not the smartest person out there when it comes to these things, but using a Gen AI, for instance, what I've done is using Gen AI. I knew about game theory because former military, and game theory comes from the military and it's been used, but it's recognized in the business world as well. Applying game theory combined with AI and being able to ask an AI system in the context of an organization, thinking about what are potential scenarios, applying that to AI, and then simply inputting, well, let's look at, this is our business environment, this is who we are, go out, check the room, the world then, and then bring back a couple of scenarios. And just playing out those scenarios based on game theory with the payoff scales and all these things happening, that's C-level exercises. That's looking at strategic positioning. What if this happens? What would be our position? We have 4 or 5 options. Okay, if we take option A, what does that mean for our 15 different stakeholders? Stakeholder A, B, etc. That's really strategic thinking. And from there, of course, and then coming back to what I do, then from there, I can distill together with communication leaders saying, okay, so we had a couple of scenarios now, they're rather realistic. Let's work them out. Let's prepare them. Because if tomorrow they happen, well, then we need to be prepared. And most of the time, these things that come out, which I've seen using this tool very regularly, is that many of the potential scenarios are, again, polycrisis interlinked things that are happening. So that's the use of AI on a strategic level. But of course, yeah, you need to know how, and have that idea of going more strategic instead of, and again, I might seem that I'm negative on content creation, that's not the case. But I hope people understand it's different than asking, ChatGPT to, write your press release instead of doing strategic, thinking based on recognized theories thanks to AI. Yeah.
I recently saw it was an old interview that resurfaced by Elon Musk, and he was talking about solving the problem of rockets and using first principles thinking, and not taking the assumption of the cost of the rockets based on previous costs, but rather break it down to its components and calculate the cost this way. And he gave an interesting example. He said, like, the reporter asked, like, so what's a tip that you can give to others who also want to recreate this type of thinking? And he said to use thinking frameworks or ideas that exist in other industries and apply them to yours. And I think that you're doing a brilliant job of doing so by bringing game theory into the picture. And I think from a strategy point of view, it's obvious to me why it's such a big success for you.
No, and it's again, it's interesting that you say that, because it's not about the framework. use a framework that works for that moment in time for you. It's not like set in stone thing and this is the holy. You use it's much more a tool, a framework, I think. And then of course when you put on the AI layer, it becomes really a tool to open up thinking, to think differently. And we need to think differently. I mean, we can't, move on with the same set of rules. The rules have the whole game has changed, so you can't keep on to the same rules. And so that's what's happening. Yeah.
That's like the big soundbite from this interview. Honestly, to get you, Philippe, a hero of mine, to say the game has changed. We need to think differently, fellow PR and comms leaders. That's just cake for me, and I love to hear it. And so, on some of the questions that I wanted to pick your brain on this interview, I think the challenge is going to be how to push the boundaries. Look, in the last 6 years, I can safely say that not a single month has gone by without a brand in some sort of situational crisis, right? And I work with a lot of communications leaders globally, as do you, and many of whom are, honest and self-reflecting. When it comes to crisis communications, they all seem to have some sort of coherent crisis plan in place. But if everyone has a plan in place, why are we seeing so many crises handled poorly and reputations sinking? What's being missed right now?
I think what I've seen, or what I strongly believe in, is that it's much more about an agile mindset. A famous person once said, "It's not about the plan; it's about the planning." And this might seem okay, you got a quote from a book and from a general, but it is true. It is the sitting down with the people that matter, and it's not only the crisis team; it's the extended crisis management team, or however organizations call this. Sitting down with them, and it's from what I just said, the game theory exercise, which is purely a thinking exercise, all the way down to reviewing standard operating procedures and even participating in the drills, putting on hazmat, what have you. It is those activities that create a mindset that set you up for being prepared if things happen. And then for a comms team, it's really looking at, are you agile enough to switch things? Because you have to understand that your beautifully crafted plan that you've created in a safe environment when, it was peacetime, will show cracks the very first second you actually are in a crisis situation. And your SOPs, some of them will not work. And, yes, the electricity will, blow up. And yes, it could be that you don't have your Wi-Fi and your internet connection. So what are you doing then? And while you cannot prepare for everything, we need to let go of that idea as well. When you have an agile mindset, when you know that your plan can be adapted to different situations, that you can scale down and scale up with your team, that you have trained this and drilled this, then it's much more about the team mindset, the agile mindset, and the confidence that you create in people as well, that they can actually fly a plane without, the big manual and 1,000 hours of because in some cases you'll have to fly the plane while it's burning without the manual and without the tower calling you in. You'll have to, figure it out yourself. And that is important, because if you stick too much to a rigid environment of SOPs and plans that you think are fine, that's setting you up for a confident environment, but it's not the right one, because we know that plans crack at the first moment. So planning is important, and having those plans. Again, I'm not saying you don't need plans. You need plans, but they need to be integrated. They need to take into account polycrisis environment, and they need to take into account different aspects, and then train your teams to get that agile mindset. And that doesn't work without training. And again, it's not about the full scale exercises. It can be very small micro learning moments throughout the week, throughout the month. But we need that more than plans, which probably don't take into account, the things that are happening at the speed that are happening today. Other thing, and your question was about, why do we see crises still happening? I think there is this. So, for instance, when there are in certain industries crises happening and emergencies happening, I see a lot of people commenting on that online. Everybody has a thought and an idea about that, and then a lot of people position themselves as specialists. There is a level of also a lot of critiques that are happening while people don't understand it. In some industries, for instance, you simply cannot communicate immediately because there's legal requirements to follow first. Other things as well in when we speak about emergencies. So non-private sector, talking about health emergencies, natural hazards happening. It's a different dynamic. There are rules to these things. When we look at epidemics and pandemics, it's normal that communicators, and then most of the time those are public communicators, public information officers, it's normal they don't have all the facts. It's very normal.
You
These
mean they're
things evolve.
humans?
Someone said, oh, but it's not 100% effective. Nothing is in science. That's the point. That's why we do scientific research. So understanding what is actually happening in what environment is much more important than like giving that first reaction, which is very easy when you're not, in the middle of things. And so I think there's also a level of this, maybe a perception that there are a lot of things happening and wrongly managed. It's not always the case if you look closer. Sometimes they're very well managed in the context of that crisis or emergency.
So it's not all that meets the eye. There's
There's
always
a lot
things
of
going on in the
things going
background, isn't
on.
it?
Yeah.
No
Of course, the
surprise there.
public aspect is important. And we understand that. That's also the public aspect, the image and etc. and the reputation. That's true, and it's important. But sometimes it's worth looking at what is actually happening and how difficult some of our colleagues in comms in what kind of difficult situations they work in. Again, that's another topic. It's very easy to critique crisis comms from other organizations, but you don't forget there's people behind that who work 24 hours and 24 hours, sometimes weeks in a row, and they also are impacted on their mental health, and they also get tired, and they also break down and cry from time to time, right? It's a human thing.
I'm sure it can't be easy, Philippe,
No,
walking in those shoes and working with the people that you
it
work with
never is.
there.
No.
It's always very serious stuff that's going on. I can see why it's such an important and critical component of the communications industry as a whole. And hats off to the people who are hardworking and do good work, and maybe they're a bit unsung at times as well. And to your point, I
Most of
appreciate
us
the
work
point out.
behind the
Right.
curtains.
Yeah.
We are not most of the time the spokesperson,
Right.
which is a good thing, I think. I mean, I'm from the school where we work behind the screens and that's hard work. And of course, sometimes we need to be the spokesperson as well. That's fine. But it's we're not in the spotlight. We work, hard work behind the screen, which is fine. You know that when you start in crisis and emergency comms, that's fine.
Now, I don't know if it's because of the fact that my wife's a doctor, but I've been weirdly fascinated in this concept of this one saying, which is even doctors need doctors, because it shows paradoxically that the doctor can't operate on themselves despite knowing the procedure inside out. Now, my question is, does this potentially apply to the profession itself? Is there a compelling case for crisis comms leaders, whether in-house or at an agency, for example, to, like a doctor would, perhaps benefit from running a case by another consultant like yourself? Are you open to working with agencies, in-house comms, like
Yeah.
solopreneurs even, to need a bit of expert advice without taking over that day-to-day client management aspect?
Yeah, and one thing that I like very much in this specialty within the larger communications profession, if like truly, and this is not to position myself, whatever, I'm talking about the colleagues, there are not so many people around with actual on the ground crisis, emergency and risk comms experience. So most of us, it's not like we know all of us, but we have a very good open working relationship. And so among consultants already, it's very easy to pick up the phone and call someone in the US or on the other side of the globe. There is an understanding, we speak the same language, and there's unfortunately, which is very strange to say, but there's unfortunately enough work going around for all of us, that we're very open and collaborate. And that's a good thing because we learn from each other, and it's really a good feeling to be part of a group of professionals that understand each other. We of course we compete sometimes, but we're also partners many times, and that's a good feeling. That's already a very nice thing that's happening, at least in the specialty of risk, crisis, and emergency comms. And then, yeah, I mean, working with agencies, because agencies, some of them are specialized or have a specialty in risk, crisis, and emerging comms, but it's not a full-time thing. Most of the time, they'll take on other work as well. So it's good from time to time to just drop in. I'm also having that outside view, just like with private sector or public sector clients. When they call me in, it's exactly to have that outside view, because of course they have procedures and they have people who have managed crisis. That's not the point, but it's bringing someone in with a different view maybe, or just, a double check on things and bringing a new perspective. And that's very valuable, I think. At least that's what my clients tell me. But it's also interesting because you actually come in, and at least that's how I work. I don't go in and say, well, this. I try to understand why some things have been set up in certain ways. Because again, as I said, in some industries, there's reasons why, the first reactive statement can't go out before maybe a 4-hour long internal or even days internal technical check, because it's the law. Good. In some other industries, you'll have to be ready in a minimum of 12 hours to walk to the government and explain everything that happened in your organization, again, because it's a law. So I just come in and try to understand, and then try to just give my advice and see what could be optimized or changed or trained better or simulated better. But there is an openness. So yeah, to answer your question, it is true. And at the same time, it works the other way around as well. So whenever I work on a more strategic paper or a new ID, now I'm writing a new book on crisis communications planning, I ask other consultants to review that and clients to review that, because they have another, again, it's using them as a consultant, because they have an outside view. We're all in our bubble, in our specialty, and that's dangerous. Sometimes we need to step out of that bubble as well and look around.
I love that, because one of the mantras for us as well with PR is collaboration over consolidation, and it's nice to hear that it's something that's also part of your DNA as well. And I think that's something that the PR and comms world needs to sort of transform towards a little bit. And the context point that you made there, and this two-way sort of communications, I think learning really does happen through storytelling and of experiences and things like that. And so it's amazing to hear that there's a healthy dialogue going on, as opposed to just prescriptive advice, if that makes sense. There's a lot of listening and learning that's happening as part of that as well. And I think that's something that people should be able to take away from, regardless of if you're in crisis and risk and emergency comms, that this dialogue is something that needs to be strived towards.
And as you say, I mean, and it makes sense, because there is no one single prescription or one single pill for a crisis situation, because they're all very different, very dynamic. And so there is no one single thing that you can apply to everything, or even just a couple of them. It's always different. There are a couple of principles, yes, overall, that we know from experience. But otherwise, it's really, everything is bespoke and very specific to the situation.
Personally, I fancy myself as a bit of a humanist, and I'm inherently skeptical of generative AI, while respecting it and admiring its potential. Like, it's here. I'm intrigued by it. I use it all the time. But let's suppose that I'm the CEO of a large US based organization whose perspective of risk really just has to do with your typical like scandals, losses, stuff that's illegal, market headwinds. What's the business case that you'd make for the industry as a whole that could perhaps be a wake-up call or serve as a much-needed reality check to take crisis and risk comms more seriously as we approach 2026?
I we now have enough case studies and frameworks to actually be able to go into an organization and say, look, this is your situation, this is where you work in, this is your license to operate, and these are the potential risks that we see from a communications point of view, which is not always the same as from a risk management professional. It's an important one. And it's based on this and this and this kind of data. this kind of historic background, this kind of movements that we see. And we can translate that to, if this would happen, it's a risk. Doesn't mean it will happen. But if this would happen, these are the potential impacts on your bottom line if it's private sector. This is the impact on your trust level, on social stability, on, you can translate these things today. And that is important to recognize, that there is a way of looking at that through different lenses. And that's the advice, because every single step, checking what is possible, so all that horizon scanning and predictive analytics through AI again, which is very helpful. All that is possible today for any kind of organization, be it private or public sector. Translating that through an exercise with different frameworks, all that is possible. Making the translation to either bottom line impact or reputational impact or trust impact or whatever you want, it is possible. So it's that kind of work that needs to be done. And I think more and more organizations, because of that continuous volatility and, looking at how the world is moving, are becoming more and more open to look at that. One thing, though, is that, and I'm trying to do that, is I try for the last year, I've been reaching out more and more to business continuity professionals and colleagues, risk management professionals and colleagues. Why? Because I saw in a couple of cases that there is really a different way of looking at things. For instance, when Heathrow went into blackout, my network of business continuity professionals was very positive about how it was handled. And I understand that they have a very positive view on that. I mean, it's one of the largest airports in the world. It goes down. 12 hours later, it was up and running again. From a business continuity point, that's, job well done, right? But from a communications point of view, from a reputation point of view, it was a disaster. So there's two things, again, coming back to, there is the operational side, there is the reputational side, there's the how does this look like side. And that is important to understand. So it's really interesting to having conversations with those colleagues and making them understand as well, like, well, okay, from an operational point of view, but don't forget there's other stuff. There's reputation, there's potential financial impact, there's potential legislation. And so that is interesting. And it works well because they're also open to talk and to look at that dimension. And some things help with that, right? I mean, there's the new ISO that came out for crisis management professionals, finally includes crisis communication.
Wow.
So things are moving in the right direction, I think.
And that's, I think, a good shout out to some taking initiatives in stakeholder prioritization, mapping, weighting, some sort of like process to go up the chain, to speak with the right people, and having different cross-industry, cross-departmental stakeholders around the table, because, you put out that from a business continuity point of view, we were fine. From a comms point of view, we weren't. And there's a stakeholder matrix beyond just these two. And so I think that's a really interesting point. And actually, there was a fun fact, which is that executives who have been faced with major crises repeatedly request more funding for communication and presentation training, with 98% stating that this was a priority, especially in organizations sized 2,500 employees and up.
Yeah. No, and it's, I think it's also, well, it's not a coincidence. I think the last two proactive meeting requests coming from large organizations. So that just, people calling me and say, we need a meeting, was actually from risk management, business continuity, senior management calling me, sitting down, having meetings with them, talking about crisis communications and preparedness and all these things. And it's a sign of the time. But normally I would get the call from the corporate comms person. Now I'm getting the calls from the business continuity and risk management people. And I also asked the question during those meetings, why isn't comms in this meeting? So in those two meetings, communications wasn't even at the table, which is a bad sign. At the same time, that more operational people are thinking about comms, that's a good sign. So now it's a matter of me having them talk to each other, but but it's a sign of the times, I think. It's good that it's moving in that direction. Yeah.
There's a perception of the comms person as not being that strategic. It just goes right back to the not being as strategic enough. And they called you in, for example, and then go, why isn't comms here? And it's, wow, that's really telling. Sign of the times, as you said. Wow.
At one case, the answer was, well, they're busy with rebranding, which like I had to keep a serious face, but was like, oh my God, I mean, we're discussing global multi-country crisis communication preparedness, and the reaction from business continuity and risk management was, well, the comms is busy with, rebranding, but let's talk about how to prepare for a crisis. And I'm like, okay, so there is a discrepancy. It shouldn't happen. But then again, I mean, later on in the second meeting, I request comms to be there. And then, of course, build those bridges, right? Because it's important. You can't just do it separately.
Collaboration.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that's all the time that we have for today. I want to give a special sincere thank you, gratitude to you, my guest, the one and only Philippe Borremans. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, for inviting me.